from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I'd like to continue on with our discussion of the remarkable set that was released by the Criterion Collection earlier this year at SPY number 1082. And that set is right here. It is called The Signifyin Works of Marlon Riggs. As we know, it contains a number of works by this great artist, Marlon Riggs. And so today I'd like to focus our attention, if I may, on one such work. It is described as being from 1989, and it is called Tongues Untied. It is approximately 54 minutes, so just shy of 1 hour, but within its running time, within its length of time, there are so many ideas and modes of expression and representation and perspectives shared, and the capturing of the essence of various subjective experiences and many other such fascinating levels and layering of thought and ideas and discussion, again contained within its running time. It is a valuable and extraordinary work of art for a number of reasons. Marlon Riggs' work, Tongues Untied. I think if we were to try to focus in on how we could describe this particular work, Tongues Untied, I think we could say it is like a type of visual poem or a set of poems, in the sense that poems or poetry are means by which people can express themselves, what it is they feel in their hearts and in their minds and their very souls. And perhaps this film can be described in one perspective as being a type of visual or cinematic or audio-visual type of poem or series or collection of such types of poems, in that they are a series or collections of self-expressions. This is a very key aspect, and I'll try to get into more detail about this particular level later on in this video. Now, when we go back and we think about the, say, essence or the subject or the focal point of such expressions, or the way in which those various cinematic or audiovisual poems are linked, say, thematically or in terms of content, I think we could focus on the fact that these are individuals, these are human beings, included in which is Marlon Riggs himself. These are individuals that are describing their own experiences as they describe it, as black gay men. And so this is from their experience, their subjective experience, and that experience, that subjective experience, is expressed in various forms or modes or methods that are captured within the running time, as I say, of this fascinating work. It is really very powerful. Now, among those modes of expression are, for example, the spoken word, poetry, and also experiences or performances captured on film or video of these particular works of poetry. And in particular, we have, among others, we have the poems and the poetry and the spoken word of Essex Hemphill. And so, for instance, we have the poems Without Comment, Homicide, In the Life, Conditions, Black Beans, Now We Think. And we have the words spoken by him, and we have him actually featured as well among other individuals that are featured in this work. And so we have sometimes the spoken word as seen performed by the performer or the artist or the poet, or sometimes we hear those words overlapping particular images or scenarios, or say dramatic representations or reenactments, or actual capturing in a type of documentary style moments of time and space in history. And so we have this overlapping of image and words, and it's the content that is very powerful, because the words are very much linked to what is being shown to us at the time. And I think if we could step back and make a basic fundamental point about this, it is the idea of, it's not just the experience of these black gay men, but it's also the experience of their struggle and the challenges that they face in various aspects of contemporary society. in which they find themselves, and to be to provide a more specific contextual basis, we understand that this is focusing in, say, on the late 80s and early 90s. It's made in 1989, but it would have also been relevant in the immediate afterward of such release, so in the late 80s or early 90s in the United States specifically. And so it's from their perspective, and to be even more specific about that, their challenges and struggles that they face, and the idea of, are they to remain, in the words of Essex Hemphill and Marlon Riggs and others, are they to remain silent? Will they stay in the realm or in the world of silence and not say anything, even though there are challenges externally placed from certain sources of society that seem to be attacking or targeting their particular way of life? Are they going to stay silent or remain within the realm of silence? In the words of, say, Essex Hemphill, as captured in some of the poetry here, silence is a shield, silence is a sword, and there is no lack of dignity in that type of way or outlook or perspective. On the contrary, there is, I think, as the film or the work suggests, there is a great deal of dignity in that type of choice and in that type of way in which maybe some people might choose to engage with or interact with the world or contemporary society from this particular perspective. So that is one method or mode, I think, that is on display. However, the opposite is true, or the other side of the coin, as it were, is also quite relevant in the discussions of the lives of these particular individuals, as featured in Tongues Untied. And it's, I think, inherent in the title itself, Tongues Untied. What is the opposite of silence? It is actual vocalized expression. And so this is another very key point of this film, and I think it captures it quite well, in particular the words of Marlon Riggs. And we actually see Marlon Riggs speaking some of these words sometimes, or we hear his voice as we see sometimes reenactments of what it is he's describing. And in fact, if we see the cover of this particular Criterion release, we actually see a close-up of the face of Marlon Riggs, and this is, I'm assuming, taken from a particular moment or some moments from Tongues Untied. And so I think this is emblematic of just how important this film Tongues Untied is in the context of the wonderful filmography and work of Marlon Riggs. But to bring it back to the point that I was originally trying to raise, it's this idea that's embedded so fundamentally within the film, that this is a means by which, or this could be seen as addressing another form of handling or dealing with, or from the subjective experience of these black gay men, the idea of handling the world around them and the engagement with the world around them and the contemporary society and the sources of, say, challenge or confrontation with respect to their own lifestyle and their own backgrounds from external sources of society, how some of these individuals choose not to remain silent, but in fact to express themselves and to vocalize what it is they are feeling. Now, what is it they are feeling? According to some of the passages captured in Tongues Untied, they might be feeling, some of the individuals here might be expressing feelings of, say, of anger and sadness, or perhaps I should say it in the reverse order. Sadness, which then finds its only mode of type of internalized expression in the form of anger. And that anger might be a generalized type of anger, or it might be, say, a specific set or sets of anger. And those are also given voice in various examples or episodes that are recited by a number of other people that are featured here. For example, there is a particular episode that is recounted or told in a very interesting story-like fashion, addressing us directly, the viewer, from one of the participants of the work, talking about trying to, say, or talking about trying out a new nightclub or going to a new nightclub and being stopped at the door and being asked for not just one piece of ID, but 3 pieces of ID. It's as though just because this person is based on the color of his skin, he seems to be treated in a much stricter and ultimately unfair way than compared to, say, other patrons of this particular club, establishment, etc. And so this is one aspect that's being addressed in terms of the way in which their subjective experience is also affected quite directly by indirect and perhaps also direct expressions externalized of racist attitudes. And so that's one aspect that's being expressed through these subjective experiences. Another aspect that's being expressed is their existence and also their subjective experience as gay men, and their sexuality, and the way in which their sexuality is very much, and I think very, very naturally so, part of who they are and their kind of character, the quality of and the nature of their characters as human beings. Sexuality is very much a way by which human beings express themselves and express their feelings and the way in which they engage with the world around them, i.e. with other people around them. Another way to express this is human sexuality. And so in that way, human sexuality is very much an important and integral part of who we are as individuals and who we are as in terms of the character of us as human beings. And so their sexuality is very much part of their own means of expression, not just expression vis-a-vis the outside world, vis-a-vis other people, but also vis-a-vis themselves. And so this also becomes a focal part of the mode of expression that we find expressed or gathered or collected within this, as I say, extraordinary work, Tongues Untied. And in this we also see modes or expressions of challenge and hardship and sadness, and that sadness, as I referred to earlier, is often expressed, and it's described by Marlon Riggs and others here in Tongues Untied. It is oftentimes expressed or internalized in the form of anger. But it's also expressed in the form of outward shows of affection. And so this film also gives us, I think, a number of warm and humorous and comic episodes that are also very much tied into directly the way in which people in general express themselves, and also these particular individuals as we meet throughout the course of watching this film, as they express themselves as well. And one very famous episode in this film is known as the snap diva situation, or this idea of the what's described in very, I think, warm and humorous terms, scenes or reenactments of the Institute of Snap Theology. And snap, there's an exclamation point after the word snap, and the idea of there are various ways in which people can express sudden moments of emotional, say, states of mind or states of being. And the snap and the gestures of the hand and the motion of the arm and the sound of the snap, or multiple snaps, as the case may be, depending on one's frame of mind. And this is another great example of yet another form of expression, outward physical expression, or expression of inward feelings made manifest in outward physical gestures. And so this is, I think, it's oftentimes considered to be, I think, very warmly a type of comic episode that's, I think, very fresh and very, very full of life, as is other parts of the work. But it's also, I think, yet another example of the underlying thesis of this film, of this work, Tongues Untied, which is that this is the cinematic expression, or this is a means by which, or an example by which, people are expressing outwardly what it is they're feeling inside. And that might seem like a very, maybe fundamentally simple proposition, but in fact, that I would suggest is so fundamental as to be one of the maybe great challenges of human existence. How are we as human beings going to truly express what it is we feel? How are we going to truly express what it is we feel? Because oftentimes there might be societal pressures, there might be external pressures that maybe have certain expectations placed upon us, such that we might think we are expressing what it is we truly feel, but perhaps deep down, underlying that is maybe not what it is we really feel, but in fact, what it is we think others want to hear us express. And so that isn't necessarily what it is we truly feel, but it is something of what we think is a satisfaction of external, outside societal mores or mores. Now, what's so remarkable, therefore, about a film like Tongues Untied and Marlon Riggs and others who are seen expressing themselves, and in fact, this is one of the great moments of Marlon Riggs' work, is that he is saying in this moment, or in this film, I listen to the beat of my heart. This is very important, so I will repeat again. He says, I listen to the beat of my heart. And in that listening and in that engagement, he understands that it is important to listen, and it is important, therefore, for the discovery and the recognition of what he also describes in that same passage of the film as truth. And so in that way, that I think is the wonderful encapsulation of the fundamental thesis of this work, namely the idea of this work, Tongues Untied, is expressing directly what it is that these individuals, these human beings, Marlon Riggs included, are feeling inside. In fact, what it is they are saying is set forth in this liberated, free fashion, tongues untied indeed. And so what this means is that in these various modes, we have, for instance, certain passages that are spoken. Essex Hemphill talks about, for instance, there are certain passages where he talks about mother, or the mother figure, and this is referring to how within the family unit, how the situation or how the perspective of this particular young man, this individual, as a gay man, and how his sexuality may be affecting the relationship that this particular person has with members of his family, such as his mother. So that's expressed in one form of poetry here. Another form of expression is, for instance, the idea of, as I say, the expression of sexuality, and also the perspective as a black man, as a young black man, and how these two, I think, fundamentally important components, and the individuals here, I think, acknowledges this as such, that they are very important to who they are as human beings and as individuals, and how they see themselves, and how sometimes these particular aspects of who they are not always easy to, say, reconcile in contemporary society. And sometimes we see this expressed, for instance, in a passage in this film where Marlon Riggs himself gives us, in this very poetic fashion, an explanation or description of his own biography growing up, and he explains in this poetic fashion directly to the camera an episode about when he was 6 years old, and his first, say, maybe acknowledgement or feeling about his own body, an exploration of his own body, and perhaps a type of innate recognition that perhaps his feelings of attraction in terms of who it was or who it is he is, or who he is as a human being, and including who he was as a young boy growing up, that led to, or that leads to, where he is now as a young man making this film. And at the same time, he is being confronted as he's growing up by notions of say, his perspective as a young man who is homosexual, and how will he face the challenges of various expectations from certain sources of society around him in terms of how they view homosexuality. And so this is one of the challenges that he expresses again in this, say, moment of biographical poetry. But then he also expresses, for instance, where he talks about being in maybe selected to go to a certain class during his young student days because of his intelligence. And so he also seems to recognize that there is some resistance that he also feels from the African American community. And this is also expressed, I think, quite directly in terms of his own sexuality. And in this biographical poetry passage, he seems to suggest that not always, but sometimes there is conflict between his identity as a homosexual man and his identity as a black man, as an African American man. And sometimes from certain parts of those communities, there might be some resistance. And so this means that those important, fundamental parts of who he is as a human being, and he acknowledges as such, who he is as a human being, are oftentimes met with various forms of resistance outside of himself. And there also lies a particular form of struggle. And, however, he is able not just to express this, but he is able to describe it, and he also acknowledges that by describing it and by vocalizing it and by giving it a type of voice in the form of cinematic or film or audiovisual expression, like Tongues Untied, he is essentially saying that instead of letting the anger and the confusion and the frustration lie deep within him, because he recognizes that perhaps that might not be a very, say, healthy option, because it has the possibility of providing some kind of other outward expression. And he acknowledges it too in a very powerful moment of the work, the idea of sadness and tragedy and anger that is remaining within without a type of outward vocalized expression might lead to other forms of negativity in one's life, and it might lead to outward forms of violence elsewhere. And this is something that he acknowledges, or that he expresses in the poetry. And so rather than go that route, according to Marlon Riggs, he rather instead express himself. And the way he must do that is by doing it in the purest form possible. And that is the result of listening to his own heart. And this is such a beautiful and wonderful way of expressing the power of this film. Namely, it's not just, or one important aspect is the recognition of the various challenges and states of, say, psychological and emotional states of mind and states of being and states of, say, existence from the subjective perspective of these individuals. Based on who it is that they are and how they identify themselves and how they see themselves and how they see the outside world and the challenges therefrom. That's one level. But the other level, too, is the idea of cinema or films or audiovisual expressions of the most direct and powerful kind, being those that are the ultimate expressions of the beating of our own hearts. And that is a very powerful source of truth, according to Marlon Riggs. And I think that is a great statement to make. Incidentally, too, I've mentioned that there are many forms of expression as captured in Tongues Untied. One of the ways is, I mentioned audio-visual expressions. Visual is very important, but audio is a very important component of that phrase, because we hear the spoken word, but we also hear the way in which the spoken word intertwines with the image, and also how the spoken word itself becomes this playful, poetic fashion in terms of rhythm, in terms of how it becomes this song-like means. Sometimes poems or words or expressions within poetry turn into these musical chants, which is very, very powerful indeed. And so it means that this type of human expression is finding various forms all at once. And so I think that is also a very liberating thing that we see on display here as well. And there are some very poignant passages that are mentioned about, for instance, the idea that's expressed in some of the poetry. Grief is darker, and says, and there's one moment where the poem says, it is darker than the man I love. And so there is this undercurrent of a type of fundamental, say, frustration or a type of challenge that is very much linked with not just their own identity, but also their psychological states of mind, and also a very existential type of expression, the idea of grief. And grief is one of the most essential forms of feeling of any human being, I would say. So this is a very powerful way of describing it. And the idea, too, of silence. Silence is my shield. Silence is my sword. I listen to the beat of my heart. And the idea, too, of the use of song And there's a very famous moment of the doo-wop ballad. There's a doo-wop ballad performance that's shown or reenacted on camera, and this is intercut with shots of, I think, actual moments of like a gay pride parade or type of protest that was occurring on the streets at the time. And so there's this incredible way in which sound and image are interacting. Sometimes it's meant to supply a type of supplement to what is being seen. Other times it's meant as a type of dialectic. For instance, this moment of the doo-wop ballad and the gay pride protest or parade, as it were, and how maybe too we have the idea of song, and how song is this way of expressing the things that we feel, love and wanting feelings of acceptance, in the form of these wonderful doo-wop ballads, and how the act of going on a parade or going on the streets and essentially expressing what it is that one feels and making such declarations in public. This is also, I think, a form of expression, and I think this link between sound and image is the type of dialectical, say, result that is at the heart, or one of the possible interpretations of that particular moment. And it goes, I think, very consistently towards what could be said to be the consistently applied thesis of this film. Namely, this is the audiovisual collection of poems or expressions that are meant to be direct representations or direct expressions of the human heart. And so this is incredible. This is very incredible. And I should say, too, that this connection between language, sound, the spoken word, and the acts and the images that we see on screen, they have, I think, various multiple interpretations. There's a particular famous moment, too, where there is a poetic passage that is given a type of rhythmic expression. Now we think as we, and then there's the F word. So now we think as we F. Now we think as we F. And it is given this almost a musical quality in terms of the way it's repeated and, as I say, the rhythmic nature of it. And so this means that, at least one of the interpretations I see, and this is what we also see, for instance, Essex Hemphill as well speaking, and we see, therefore, the idea of the sexuality is very important also as a means by which people express themselves. I mean, another form of self-expression is through sexuality, and that's not just a type of emotional expression, but also the physical act of sex as well. And so this is a type of way of one's expression of how one feels vis-a-vis another person. And so that is another very important mode of expression. And so what this is describing, in one way of looking at it, is the way in which sexuality and physical sexuality is also very key in terms of an expression of what it is we feel at a particular moment. Now we think as we, right? F word, right? But also this is linked to with another very key aspect of this film, which is the idea of, and this is so powerful and poignant, and it's expressed again in the poetry and the words, death. Death. Now we think as we F. And what it is are we thinking? It is a mode of self-expression, but also we think, according to Essex Hemphill and Marlon Riggs and others, there is the conscious awareness of the dangers, the physical dangers. And this is leading to, or this is directly linked by the film to the AIDS crisis. And there are mentionings, very direct mentionings of, and very powerful shots, say, of obituaries of people, of human beings who have passed away due to certain complications involving AIDS. And so this becomes a very sad, and for a lot of people, including Marlon Riggs, who so makes a reference with respect thereto in the film, this becomes a very tragic part of their lives. And so this is also something that they are finding that they need to not just talk about, but they need to be able to confront. And Marlon Riggs, too, says this. He needs to battle against these particular feelings or these particular states of negativity in order to keep on expressing himself. And so he describes it as being a time bomb in my blood. But still, he says, still I listen to the beat of my heart. And so this very act of expression becomes an act of powerful defiance and resistance in the most direct means possible. I must either express myself or I confront death, which is such a powerful dichotomy. It's so stark. And this expression, especially in the words of Marlon Riggs, and he's sharing with us his direct experience, I think is so bold, and one of the things that really resonates within this work to this very day. I listen for my own quiet implosion. My goodness, my goodness. And this leads to the idea, not just, it's such a powerful linkage too, because in this he is establishing, therefore, the fundamental importance of expression, the fundamental importance of self-expression. It is so fundamentally important to express yourself. And in the context of whatever context it may be, again, human beings, the map of human existence is varied, and there's a multitude of possibilities and examples throughout the entire world. But expression is very important, no matter who you are or where you're from. And in the context of Marlon Riggs and the other individuals that are featured in Tongues Untied, it is very much part of who it is they are, and what it is, a very important part of how it is they are essentially moving on and moving forward and trying to essentially do this as a means of confronting the various challenges that they face. And in this context, so supremely and so confidently, Marlon makes the link between this mode of self-expression and civil rights, and the civil rights movement, in particular of the 1960s United States, marching on to freedom land. We shall overcome. And the linkage between civil rights and the modes of self-expression that we have identified, or we have witnessed here by watching Tongues Untied, in terms of the expressions of these various people who are homosexual and who are also African American, and they're speaking from these perspectives at the same time, and the ideas of how they are trying to confront, say, homophobia and also racism, and how that is expressed in their own lives individually. And then Marlon Riggs takes that step and links it to civil rights. And the film then leads Marlon Riggs to one of the most powerful passages or powerful statements that are captured here. And it's a type of resolution or summing up of the thesis or the foundational statement of this work. And he says this: "Now I speak, and my burden is lightened, lifted, free." Wow. Wow. This is the ultimate expression or the resolution of the thesis of the work, namely the importance of self-expression in order to speak what it is in your heart, whether it be anguish or sadness or anger, or whatever it is. The expression of that is an expression of yourselves. And by doing that, by speaking, your burden becomes lightened, lifted, and free. That, I think, is a very powerful statement on humanity. It is a very powerful statement, of course, in terms of the importance of expression in the context of the lives of the various people that we meet in this work, Tongues Untied, Marlon Riggs, Essex Hemphill, and others. And it also remains, I think, such a universal message in terms of the power and the importance of expression in these various modes, the various multitude of modes of human expression that we have encountered all throughout history, many examples of which are contained within this bold and everlasting work from Marlon Riggs, which is called Tongues Untied. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.